Regan Brashear is an award-winning independent filmmaker originally from Virginia, now based in Oakland, California. She has been working on disability, economic, racial, LGBTQ, and youth justice issues for over 20 years, now through documentary film, theater, union organizing, community forums, and grassroots activism. 2 of the films she previously worked on, Under Our Skin and The Grove, aired on PBS in 2011. Regan began Fixed in 2006 as part of her master's program in social documentation at the University of California. She finished it with the help of close to 400 Kickstarter and individual donors, as well as the Pacific Pioneer Fund and 2 filmmaking residencies at Arizona State University and DREF, Disability Rights Education Defense Fund. Since its release 1 year ago, the film has screened in film festivals around the world, winning Best Documentary Feature at the Picture This Festival in Calgary, Alberta, and as the keynote film at 8 academic and professional conferences. Most recently, the United Nations Human Rights Treaties Division has acquired the film to screen in their Human Rights Film Series. Please help me welcome Regan Brashear.
Thank you. Well, thank you all so much for coming tonight, and I want to extend a special thank you to Matthew Wangeman and Lauren Copeland-Glenn and NAU for All and the Commission on Disability Access and Design and everyone who helped pull this evening together. It's been in the works for a while, and it's such a pleasure to be here. I also want to, you see just me here, but I want to also thank everyone that helped make this film. It took a small village to pull this off. As you heard, we had, over 400 or almost 400 Kickstarter donors and individual donors that helped, that believed in the ideas behind this film and wanted to help make it happen. And endless people that donated their time on the crew. A lot of people donated their time and just, it's been an amazing journey. It took, as you heard, also 7 years from the beginning of the research phase into shooting, and we actually had 2 sort of production phases because I started the film at my master's program and ended with like a 34-minute cut and with a lot of encouragement to keep going, and so I just kept going, but really it wasn't until, Kickstarter came around, and if anybody wants to talk about that, it's an amazing platform I really encourage people to use that want to get creative projects off the ground. And then the support of different organizations, Arizona State and DREDF, as you heard, and it just was an amazing effort, group effort. So it's been such a joy, and you spend months in the editing room, and you don't really know if anybody else is going to really care about these issues, and it's just been amazing to kind of come out of the dark cave and start sharing the film. And we had our first public screening actually before the film was officially done in Lisbon. It was invited to be a part of the EU's commission called the NERI project, which is Neuro Enhancement, Responsible Research and Innovation. And they wanted to use it at their National Science Museum as like a kickoff event to announce that they're doing this 3-year NERI project. So that was, thrilling. And so anyhow, thank you for being here. And, I wanted to say, I really want to welcome and have time for your questions. I just want to say a few things to be sure that I get to say. And that is, there's a lot of ways to talk about this film. We could talk about it, in regards to engineering or social justice issues and a lot of different directions, religion, philosophy, and I love that. And I'm so grateful that it seems to be attracting, very many different disciplines. I think the one core thing I really want to make sure is clear is this idea that science isn't done in a vacuum. It's not done in a value-neutral space, that it's done in the world that we live in a context that has vast inequalities, based on race and class and gender and ability. And so I really wanted to look at how does that work then? Like, how do we, what is the relationship between enhancement and this drive to be better, stronger, faster, and how we look at disability in our culture today, and is there a relationship, and are there values that are feeding this that we may, if we actually look at them closely, we may decide they aren't the best way to go, and so there's had a lot of goals that I was trying to meet with the film, but one of them was to really try to tease out this relationship and at least open space for conversation. And then also that in my world, I'd seen very limited perspectives or portrayals of people with disabilities, and often people talking about people with disabilities and not, or like films that would show people with disabilities as like these passive, needy recipients that need to be fixed. And so my main, one of the core goals was no, we need more representations that show a diversity of perspectives, that don't give this idea of there's this monolithic disabled perspective, that shows people arguing that have disabilities, and so I hope that came across, and also that locates them as the active experts in the film. That that are, there's a mix of folks, but that's loud and clear. And gosh, I could keep going, but I do want to, maybe we could have some questions, and then I can talk some more, and we can talk about the process of making the film, or any of the questions that are raised. Before we go there, another couple of questions I wanted to share with you guys to see if you want to speak to is this question of where is disability located, right? Is it in the body? Is it in society? Is it some sort of space in between those two? And how do we, given that, who or what are we actually fixing, right? What needs fixing, and how do we assess our priorities around that? And just a bright light here. And then, you saw really different perspectives around. Basically, I think everybody in the film is wanting you to think differently about disability, but then from there, it's very different perspectives that you hear from disability is located in the technology. Like with Hugh Hare, the bionics engineer, who's saying, actually, I'm not disabled, it's these crappy legs that we have available, so I'm gonna make some amazing legs and make me run faster than I ever could before, I'm sorry, were you, okay, cool. Versus, Gregor Walbring or Patty Burns' perspective, which they're looking much more at society and saying, actually that's what needs to be fixed, right? That's what we need to change, is we need to fix people's perceptions and address the stigma that exists and pervades the world we live in. So it definitely was a film that I was trying to raise questions rather than, hit anyone over the head with an answer. So hope that came through. Anyhow, any questions? Yeah. Oh, sorry. I guess we have a mic here.
I can project. Were the individuals in the movie all local from Phoenix or Arizona, or were they all over the country?
Yeah, they're all over the country. Gregor is German, but he lives in Calgary, so we went up to Canada to film him. And Cressida Hayes, who talks about cosmetic surgery, for a little bit. She's in Edmonton. Everyone else is in the U.S., but actually the main locations would be MIT is where we filmed, Hugh Hare, and the Media Lab is where John Hockenberry, at the time we were filming, was working as a distinguished fellow. Now he's got this, daily radio program out of New York. So that's where we filmed those guys, and then the rest, I think, were mainly Bay Area. Yeah, actually. And then actually the dance companies, there's 12 different dance companies from around the world, or different performance artists. Like Sue Austin is the lady you see in the underwater scene in the bookends the film. She's from the UK. And actually there's a couple companies from the UK, the Anjali Dance Company that you see during the prenatal screening discussion, the PGD. They're based in the UK. And Kanduku, which was the one that was dark, and they're kind of putting together crutches. It's sort of kind of a military dark feel to it. And then Axis Dance is from Oakland, where I live. And there's actually 3 different snippets of performances with Axis. And Lisa Bufano, who's one of the people the film is dedicated to, is the artist who, because she passed away last fall. And she's the one using the long stilts. And so she was living in the Bay Area, but I think she's actually from the East Coast. So anyway, thanks.
Cool. Depending on the geographic location, did you find any differing opinions of disabilities and depending on in the UK or here or the East Coast, West Coast, what were the different kind of findings that you found, or were they similar or that?
I can't say that I noticed any geographic differences. I mean, I think just that, the MIT Media Lab, because they are doing a lot of, really fascinating engineering work there and all different kinds of work. We actually also interviewed a neuroscientist out of the same media lab, Ed Boyden, but we're going to try to make a next film he'll be in. But they're certainly located, I think, just because they're in that field, that they're talking from a certain perspective. And then, he teaches at the University of Calgary in the Disability Studies department there. And so no, I can't say I really noticed. And just through my screenings, I've certainly met people sort of all across the spectrum, everywhere I go. But that's a good question. So.
At the beginning, you saw scuba diving. Do you know how to movement?
Yeah, that was a commissioned art piece. Her art project is called Freewheeling, and that was called Creating the Spectacle. And it was commissioned before the Olympics and Paralympics in London in 2012. And she's actually, you can see in some of the shots, there's these propellers underneath and these large plexiglass fins, and she's controlling it with her feet. They are actually, there's so much interest in that chair that they're trying to prototype it to, make it more available. She's actually has been traveling around the world, doing shows at aquariums, and they did a film piece of her doing it. That the film piece is also traveling independently, where she's got screens in a circle, 360, so you can walk through it, and it's like you're underwater. And I haven't seen it, but it sounds really great.
Thanks for the movie. It was enlightening. You said you weren't keen to smash us over the head with your perspective throughout the movie. So what you actually thought, I don't think it actually came through terribly much. I think it was very well balanced, the movie, in the end. But did your perspective change from the beginning to the end?
I'm not sure I heard the beginning. Were you saying that my perspective wasn't very...
You said that you didn't intend to hit us over the head with what you thought.
Okay.
So did you find that in the process of making the movie, your perspective did change through the process?
It certainly did, yeah. I mean, so the original idea for the film came 10 years ago now, when I met Gregor Walbring speaking at a conference, and he was talking about a conference he was involved with that was focused on bioengineering a more productive workforce and bioengineering the cyborg soldier, and sort of how are we going to create these things. And at that time, having come out of my undergraduate training, which was in the humanities and American studies, and had studied the eugenics movement in the US, I was like, this sounds scary, And so I kind of started the project sort of worried, and really that was the question was what is going on here? And certainly through meeting everyone here, it was yes, I was getting stretched in all directions, and I feel like that's where I really hoped to take you on that journey with me. It felt like it's like an honest reflection of my own experience of wow, this is a really important perspective, and how do we how do we reconcile? Like, yes, we need innovation. Yes, humans have been evolving with our technology from day one, and it's sort of the sides that Hockenberry and Hugh Hare and even some of what James Hughes is bringing to it, we're all sort of like, yeah, you can't argue with that. Yeah, why don't we attack the Super Bowl and not, like in terms of like funding? I mean, sorry to all football fans, but you know what I'm saying. And so those definitely made me challenge my own sort of preconceptions, and was good to push me to try to really create as much of a well-rounded, debate as I could. I mean, certainly there's a lot of voices missing, and there's, much more. We had over 200 hours of footage, and so we're actually hoping to make this a trilogy. So this one is heavier on physical enhancements and physical disabilities and looking at that, and so I want the second one to be more about the brain and looking at neuroenhancement and neuroethics a little bit more closely. So stay tuned. Hopefully not 7 more years, though. So, yeah.
Hi. Oh, wow. This is weird. So watching the movie, I saw that a lot of those technologies were still in the lab phase. They were being experimented on. A lot of them were being prototyped. Since you started making the film, how much of those technologies have come out to consumers?
Well, that's a great question. The exoskeleton that you see in the beginning that Fernando's using, that's made by Exobionics, and that's now being marketed mostly to rehabilitation centers. I'm not sure how many have been sold. It's not like that widely. It's just a handful of centers to sort of start using it, and so that's out. Hugh's legs, the biomes are on the market, although he's having a hard time getting Medicare to cover it at a point that he could like mass market them, and make them affordable and accessible. So right now I think it's mostly returning vets that are using the legs. And the chip that you see, that is very early. They have done another test more recently where they've gotten a little further along, and but I think that's a ways out before that will be trying to think of the other. All of the hands are on the market. The eye limbs, touch bionics. So yeah.
Also, going back to disabilities, a lot of it is a medical problem, so it's up to doctors to kind of work together with engineers to come up with these technologies. What kind of collaborations did you see between doctors, patients, and engineers when coming up with these technologies?
I'm not sure I understand the beginning. I'm sorry, could you?
Whenever you're developing something for someone, I imagine that because everyone's disability is different, no two people are ever the same. So there has to be this collaboration between doctors, patients, and engineers in some sense. So in what ways during the making of this film did you see that collaboration take place?
Okay. Yeah, well, since we weren't able to follow the whole development of any of them, I think that would be a really interesting story to get. But I can tell you what I did observe, and that's EXO has a team of physical therapists working with people like Fernando are volunteer test pilots is what they call them, and so they were giving them feedback, and they're developing the technology with their feedback. Yeah, I mean, then with with Hughes, his prosthetic legs, he's tries them out on himself, so it's sort of a very quick feedback loop. And I mean, actually, at Arizona State, are you guys aware of the APAC program, the APAC IGERT? Okay, that was their focus is trying to get people with disabilities either to to become the people that are creating these technologies. Or at least to be in conversation, and so I think that would be a great example of where I think they're really trying to do that well. But also, I heard a lot of cases of people saying they wish that people with disabilities were being, brought in and included from day one, so that it's not those people adapting to the technology, but it's much more suited to people's needs. So,
yeah. Do you think, with talking about the media and people with disabilities, and people with disabilities have learned behaviors to manipulate to get what they want, would you say the big media companies manipulate people's perspective of people with disabilities to make them seem less likely that they could do anything, and like get degrees or have jobs, or just say, oh, he's a homeless man with no legs, we should pity him, he doesn't know anything, but he could still be having degrees in anything?
Can you repeat the first part of what you were saying? Thanks.
The people in the media portray people with disabilities, and not to the best degrees. Is it going to change over time with people like you and these documentaries on like PBS or something, or is it going to stay the same?
Well, thank you. I certainly hope it will change, and that this film contributes as part of that movement. I mean, I think we are seeing, a little more people with disabilities in roles in shows and whatnot. I think we have a long way to go. It's just starting. I mean, it's the same thing, right, with like lots of different minorities, right? Like people of different sexual orientations or races, or there's just not very good, nuanced, meaningful roles yet out there. But I think it's getting better, and I think certainly if we all demand that, and when we see portrayals that are just not useful for any of those cases, that we should, write to the TV station that's airing the sitcom that's, actually got offensive portrayals of, different folks in there. I think it will happen. I just think it's taking a long time. Yeah.
Matthew says that he thinks disability is not a medical problem, but a social problem, and he hopes that your film will help people think that way.
Thank you. Me too. I agree. Yeah. I mean, that's the big hope, right? Is trying to break out of this limited idea of that disability is just in the body and just to be fixed, and that, yeah. So we have a lot of work to do in society to make that really real.
Come on, all you students need to step up to the plate. Forcing us professors to speak. I went to school with Renee Tajima Pena and others, so it's really good to see her work and influence with you. And also, I think the film is very well put together, a good cross-section of arts and humanities, et cetera. The one concern I had was with our man, James Hughes, because it seems to me that his liberal embrace of eugenics is kind of hard to misinterpret. I mean, it's very clear. He wants to embrace those aspects of eugenics and research that may indeed affect the social fabric of variation that Gregor embraces. So my question is, did he have a change of heart or some type of intervention after seeing the movie? I can only hope, because, I mean, quite frankly, I don't think any of us are against the type of futurist or, technology advancing human behavior, et cetera. But it seemed that he went off a little bit on the deep end and might not have been the best advocate for his own argument. So I'm just wondering how he saw himself.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we did shoot this in 2000, that particular scene with him in 2007. And so, I think he has at least softened his language around it. I don't think that he's actually, I think he would still argue for the same points, and he, he has seen, I sent a copy to everybody before, the film went public, and he said, he was not happy that those were in there, but he did actually say that other than those couple sound bites, he felt like, it was well balanced, and so, and I really did try hard to show the complexity of him, he does sort of show, like, he's a likable guy, he's making jokes about Christina Aguilera, and, just show more sides of him and not just, earlier cuts, I was just, because I was so, was so shocked by these statements too, that it was sort of more about that, and I think also having them come later in the film is hopefully more effective after you've you've been following him, and then it's like, oh wow, this is sort of the end of where this is the trajectory of where these beliefs could take us, not necessarily. And I was grateful that he just was speaking so plainly, right? Like that it was like, thank you for just, that's what we're talking about, So, yeah. There's a question. Oh, there's one in the back there. Oh, okay.
Okay, well, thank you for your work. Very thought-provoking. One question I had as you were building this story was you interspersed with people's desires for enhancements. So it seemed to add an interesting piece to this dialectic you were trying to set up. So I wondered why you chose to do that, because I don't know, it seemed to not provide the balance that I was looking for, or maybe you were doing that with the arts. So I'm interested in how you used other filmmaking techniques to maybe get us to look at these issues.
Well, I was using those little snippets to basically do a couple things. One, just to lighten it up, because the film is so heady and talk heavy, and just to offer a moment of comic relief, but also to on a deeper level to kind of get at this, the subtitle of the film is the science/fiction of human enhancement, and so I was trying to get at that interplay between our imagination, which is a powerful, beautiful thing, right? Like, what can we imagine if we could imagine anything, But then to look at how it does feed, how does it actually feed what we're, our actual science and engineering, what we're creating, and what remains fiction, and how, and there, I think there is there's a loop there that a lot of the things that we're working on, or that like the transhumanists, for instance, are talking about, they may always remain in the realm of science fiction, so I just was trying to get at that. I don't honestly think I got there enough to make that point. So I understand if you're like, not, that wasn't clear, So yeah, that was really the main goal, was to try to point at that gently, and then also, to break up the chapters a little bit. And then also, the dance was certainly very consciously a choice to sort of challenge ableism, basically, kind of challenge our assumptions of what we think bodies should do and can do, and look at these beautiful, amazing bodies and people, and and to keep coming back to that, as what we're actually talking about, the becomes more kind of life and death. Like, the issues become heavier as we get closer to the prenatal screening and eugenics, and that conversation that comes towards the end, and actually having the Anjali Dance Company is all the dancers have developmental disabilities, so we're actually talking. I mean, you're actually seeing dancers that we're talking about. These technologies could screen out and are screening out, right? Like, these are the people that we're talking about, So hopefully that some whether it was very clear, I don't know, but hopefully on a visceral level, you kind of could get some of that,
I'm not really sure how to ask this question. I was thinking about it with what I've been learning about medicine and what I just saw with technology. It's not really it's still a thing, but in the future I feel like it'll kind of be eliminated because we can fix anything. But what do you think your views on natural selection. Like, what's gonna happen with that? Like, what? Like, how are we? I don't know how to really ask this. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Can
Sorry.
can you try rephrasing? Just
Like, how do you think growing technology or medicine will affect natural selection?
Well, I think that some of the beliefs that are coming, that are very much coming from a perspective that we will be able to control what happens to our bodies and minds in the future, that we will have the power to, control our destiny, basically. I think there's a very strong perspective and a very strong, thrust that we're heading towards that troubles me, honestly. Like, I don't, for me, I feel like a lot of this is rooted in our fear of mortality, right? Like, it's just like our fear of that we are in, bodies that will die, and it's sort of like that freaks people out, understandably. And I feel like we're trying so hard to control that and control that bodies are fragile and vulnerable to injury and illness. And that is my belief. And so I guess I just feel like I'm concerned about where we could go with some of these technologies that really do have far-reaching repercussions, especially in genetics. Bionics, it's one thing, but it's sort of you up the ante when you start, changing the germline, and so I guess I don't have a really good answer for you, but that's my concern for sure.
Robin, thank you so much for coming. And I've got about 44, yes, they're all looking at me, pre-service teachers here from my courses. And I'm working with some colleagues in the room. And if you were to ask one question of the students to reflect on as they watch this film, what question would that be?
I think that basic question of where is disability located, right? Like that Matthew's bringing up, like that. Let's open up that conversation and not. I think that's step one, right? Because everything else is going to follow from where you go after that. So, yay, teachers!
Thank you so much for coming. I think I heard you say that you envision a trilogy for this, and you mentioned that the second part would be brain or neural enhancement. I'm wondering what you are thinking of projecting to part 3 in terms of, kind of the bigger picture for us.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how long part 2 takes. But part 3, I would like to go back into the genetics and prenatal screening area and reproductive technologies and just sort of look, because I think it will be probably 3 years at least down the line before we're there. And so I think we'll be seeing a lot more sort of knotty issues coming up in that area. And I'm just, I felt like it was so hard to just give that much, like it was just sort of just skimming the surface. And so yeah, that's the dream. And we're trying to get this film on PBS. So it might be a little early to be like, call your local PBS and request it, but at some point, maybe we could, if you sign our mailing list, we'll let you know, and it would be really helpful. We'll be applying in April to have it launch next July at the 25th anniversary of the ADA. So please say a prayer for that. There's a lot of hoops to actually get it out there. So actually, it is going to be. We just signed on with an international distributor, and they just today wrote that Singapore Airlines and China Airlines are going to be. They would like to buy a license the film for a couple months. So it's getting out there.
Cool. So I guess that partially goes with my question. I was curious if you have or would show this in a different country and how you think people would react to it.
Yeah, I've actually there's been a lot of screenings in Europe. Like I said, the first screening was in Lisbon, and I think I was surprised. I wasn't actually thinking globally as I probably should have been, when I was making it. And I think they're actually a few steps ahead of us in terms of really knowing how to engage with social and ethical questions around science and technology. And so they've been using it. This NARI project involves 13 different countries. So there's another NARI spin-off, an event that happened in Budapest that I wasn't actually at myself, but it looked amazing, sounded amazing. They brought together people with disabilities and caregivers and physical therapists, and had like a pre-survey and then a post-survey, and they're trying to use it as a tool to build communication. And let's see, I have screened in a few festivals in Europe and Paris and the Czech Republic. And then again, it's going to be in Switzerland, and Gregor's going to be there as a keynote. The end of November, a group's having forgetting the group's name, Pro Infirmis is having a conference on human enhancement, and this will be like the keynote film at the end of the day. And then in Canada, actually tomorrow night, they're showing it at the University of Calgary with Gregor, where he lives. Yeah, it's been great to have people in the film actually get to come, and Gregor and I actually came to speak at a conference in Tempe, the Governing Emerging Technologies Conference in May, this past May. And then he was at the keynote for RESNA, the Rehabilitative Engineering Society of North America, which I wasn't able to make, but it was awesome. He did the keynote and showed the film. So yeah, it's getting out there. But other than, actually Australia, we're going to be the opening night film in Melbourne, Australia, at the largest disability film festival there in December. So I actually had to turn down a trip to go. It's very painful. But yeah, there's just so many different things happening. We're actually trying to, we're working on an event in DC called Future Tense, which is actually with the ASU, so ASU and Slate Magazine and the New America Foundation. They have this collaboration called Future Tense, and so we're going to have an event on technology and inequality that I thought was happening during the Australia conference, but now it's moving to March. So anyway, yeah.
Oh, sorry, that's us up here. I want to thank you for such a balanced film, but also for leaving the occasional jarring statement in there that can make us sort of take a breath in when someone says something that we're not sort of expecting. And it's really a statement for the pre-service teachers when they're thinking about where disability is located. If you're going into your inclusive classrooms and inclusive schools, you actually get to set the tone for where disability is located. And as the parent of an 11-year-old with multiple disabilities who has experienced a very inclusive life, he would sit firmly in that mindset of Gregor, where he considers himself a variation and possibly an enhancement. And his mates are the same. And while adults will come to us when there's a new technology or a new cure in the news, the kids are more like, well, why bother? He's perfectly fine as he is. They might enhance his wheelchair to be able to do more, but when it comes to walking, the comment that they've said is, why bother? He can get places faster with us pushing. So you get to set the scene, so you actually get to change the world, which is really cool.
Thank you. That actually reminds me that Fixed is partnering now with the United Spinal Association, and one of the things that they're working on is passing a bill, and I always get the numbers wrong, it's HR 942 and Senate Bill 948, which is the Ensuring Access to Quality Complex Rehabilitative Technology Act. And if you sign up on the mailing list outside, I will send you guys a note which links to, basically they're asking people to write your congresspeople to encourage them to pass this bill that would cover the right, that would let people have access to complex rehab technology is what they would call it. And so please sign up when you leave and look it up, or you can just go to United Spinal Association's website and find a lot more information there.
I was wondering if you ever feel as though you're at a disadvantage in the film industry being a female filmmaker, and if you find it hard to secure funding for your films based on the subject matter.
Oh, there you are. I thought I saw you. I was like, where are you? And the last part was if it was hard to fund based on the subject matter. Ooh, yeah, those are good questions. I mean, I think documentaries in general have a harder, path to hoe, or whatever the saying is, and I do think, I'm sure my gender has played into it. I don't know, can't point, to an example of that, but I can say definitely the content of the film is a hard one to fund. And also the style that I chose to take. Right now, it's much more in vogue to have like a character-driven story where you see, Billy fight the odds, and then Billy triumphs and beats the odds, or he doesn't, or like that kind of 3-act structure. And this is more of a hybrid essay film, and it also doesn't have narration. A lot of people were like, where's your narration? And personally, I don't like narration. I want the film to be able to speak for itself, and people to draw their own conclusions. And I feel like often narration is sort of when people are telling you what you should take away, and so it was a really hard film to, I think, to be fair, to describe in words in, grant proposals before it was done. I mean, I had sort of a general idea, but like it really wasn't until I was in the editing room, which is not ideal. Like you want to be able to have a way to tell that story, in the beginning to get people excited, and so. But I think, yeah, disability, sadly, is a topic that it's hard to fund. It's not the sexy, issues that people are looking for. But it's all right, because there's the crowdsourcing methods these days that I think are really making a dramatic impact. Where like we had 400 Kickstarter donors, the average donation was like $80, which it's like that felt really neat to be able to be like, wow, there's 400 people behind me that it was like didn't have to be this huge outpouring of cash. It was just like a lot of people, the whole barn raising idea, and it was such an amazing community builder. And that actually prompted our second phase of production, because we thought we were wrapping up, and then we ended up meeting so many new people, and it was like, oh no, we need to include these voices too, and so. Yeah, I mean, I think things are getting better for women in the film industry, but again, this kind of is a slow road, and there's, we have a lot to do in that area too. But it's a good question. Oh yeah. Okay. Sorry, this is.
So, as I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm thinking about the way that we treat development in other countries. That your title is really, I think, perfect in this. That we have this idea that we need to go and fix things. So, we will go in and say, oh, we have all this fantastic technology, and we're going to give it to you, and it's going to make your lives really better, and then we leave. And it seems like some of the people that are in your film are saying those same things. So that's great. I love my wheelchair, but it would be fantastic if they could make it waterproof. These little teeny things. So instead of listening to what people need, they're just kind of saying, well, here's all this great technology, and let's keep going forward with that. And I think that's important. But if you're not actually listening to the people that are using the technology, how far does that really get you?
I think that's a great point. Yeah, and I think that is one of the core sort of goals with the film, and sort of doing the community engagement piece, and doing this event, the Future Tense event in DC, which is focused on policymakers and staffers in DC, and to get that to just help as much as we can, you know, in our one small way, like just really try to help facilitate those conversations. And also reaching out to medical schools and physical therapy schools and engineering schools, and, you know, trying to do a sort of a coordinated, you know, screening campaign to bring, you know, different communities together. And there's a lot of different projects in the works that, you know, we're trying to get the film out too. So, and if you have ideas, let me know. It's still, you know, there's still a lot more to be done. So, yeah. Well, if there's no more questions, should we wrap up? Any more questions? All right, well, thank you so much. Please join the mailing list or our Facebook page. We're on Twitter, FixDoc, and stay in touch. And good luck to all the teachers in training in the audience. That's really great. Thank you for coming.